I don't usually hike alone. That's probably the first mistake I made, and the one I think about the most now. I'd gone hiking plenty of times before, but always with friends. This time, though, everyone bailed last minute, and for some reason I decided to go anyway. I told myself it would be peaceful. Just me, the mountains, and a full day to clear my head. The hike itself was completely normal. Trees surrounded the trail on both sides, tall and dense, the kind that block out most of the sky. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. Birds chirped overhead, and every now and then I'd hear leaves crunching somewhere off the trail, probably a deer or something small. Nothing felt wrong. I walked for hours. I stopped to drink water, took a few pictures, sat on a rock and just listened to the quiet. By the time I checked my watch again, I realized I'd been out for almost 8 hours. That's when I decided it was time to head back. The sun was already starting to dip behind the mountains, and the light filtering through the trees had turned orange and dim. I turned around and started walking, but almost immediately something felt off. The trail didn't look the same. At first I thought I was just tired. Trails can look different depending on the direction you're facing, right? But the farther I walked, the more unfamiliar everything became. Certain bends in the path were gone. Landmarks I remembered weren't there anymore. I stopped walking and just stood there listening. The forest was quieter now. No birds, no wind, just my own breathing and the faint ringing in my ears. That's when panic started creeping in. I pulled out my phone, no signal. Not even enough to load a map. The sky was getting darker fast, and I knew enough about hiking to understand something important. It was too late to keep wandering. Walking blindly through the woods at night was a good way to get seriously hurt, or worse. I turned on my flashlight and decided to move carefully, hoping I'd stumble onto something familiar. About 20 minutes later, when my legs were already shaking from nerves and exhaustion, I saw something ahead through the trees. A cabin. It looked old. Really old. The wood was dark and weather-beaten, and part of the roof had collapsed inward. It didn't look like anyone had been there in years. But it was shelter. My flashlight flickered as I approached, the battery clearly dying. I knocked on the door a few times, calling out, but there was no response. After a moment of hesitation, I pushed the door open. It creaked loudly. Inside it was surprisingly clean. Dusty, yes, but not trashed. And right there in the center of the room was a bed. Not a mattress on the floor. Not a cot. An actual bed. Perfectly made. One pillow. One blanket. It was strange. But at that point I didn't care. I told myself that if the owner came back I'd explain. Or maybe no one lived there anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The cabin was dead silent. That's when I noticed the paintings. They covered almost every wall. Portraits of people. Men, women, old, young. All of them staring straight ahead. All of them smiling. Not wide smiles. Not exaggerated. Just wrong. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I felt uncomfortable, but exhaustion hit me hard. My body was heavy, my eyelids burning. I turned off the flashlight to save what little battery was left and lay down. As I stared into the darkness, I could still feel them, watching me. I remember thinking how ridiculous that sounded, and then I fell asleep. I woke up early the next morning to sunlight on my face. For a second I felt relief. I was alive. It was daytime. I could find my way back. Then I sat up. The walls were bare. No paintings. None. I froze, my stomach dropping as I slowly looked around the room. Every single portrait was gone. In their place were windows. Dozens of them. Windows that looked out into the forest. My heart started pounding as I walked closer to one. The glass was old, slightly warped, and outside, standing just beyond the trees, were people. Men, women, young. All standing perfectly still. All smiling. All staring directly at the cabin. At me. I stumbled back, my legs weak, my breath shaky. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen as the realization hit me. They weren't paintings. They were watching me the entire night. I ran. I didn't grab my backpack. I didn't look back. I burst out of that cabin and sprinted through the forest until my lungs burned. Somehow, by pure luck, I found the trail and made it back to my car. I never reported the cabin. I never went back. But sometimes, when I'm hiking with friends now, I'll catch myself looking at the trees, and for just a second, I feel like I'm being watched again. I've worked night shifts at hospitals for most of my adult life, so I'm used to strange hours, strange sounds, and strange people. You learn pretty quickly how to tune things out. Machines beeping, distant footsteps, quiet crying behind curtains, it all becomes background noise after a while. This happened during one of those overnight shifts. I was working at a long-term care hospital, the kind where patients stay for weeks or even months. Because of that, we had a simple identification system. Every patient wore a colored wristband. Green meant alive. Red meant deceased. Red bands were supposed to be removed immediately after a patient passed, but sometimes things didn't go perfectly at night. Understaffing, paperwork delays, that kind of thing. Around 1:30 in the morning, I was told to grab some supplies from the basement storage. Nothing unusual. I'd done it dozens of times before. The basement was quiet, cold, and smelled faintly of disinfectant and old concrete. I walked down the empty hallway toward the elevators. The lights overhead hummed softly, flickering just a little like they always did at night. I pressed the call button. When the elevator doors opened, there was already someone inside. A woman. She looked like a patient, hospital gown, socks, thin frame. She was standing calmly near the back wall, staring straight ahead. Not distressed, not confused, just waiting. That didn't strike me as odd at first. Patients were allowed to walk around the hospital to stretch their legs, especially those who'd been there a long time. The only strict rule was that everyone had to be back in their rooms by 10. It was well past that. Still, I smiled politely and stepped inside. "Evening," I said. She didn't respond, just shifted her weight slightly. I glanced at the panel and pressed the button for the basement. That's when I noticed something strange. None of the buttons were already lit. Usually, if a patient was in the elevator, they'd already selected a floor. But she hadn't. For a brief moment, I wondered if she was heading to the basement too, which didn't make much sense. There was nothing down there for patients. The doors slid shut with a soft thud, and the elevator began its slow descent. The hum of the motor filled the small space. I could hear my own breathing, steady but tired. I stole another glance at her wrist. The band was turned inward so I couldn't see the color. I told myself I was overthinking it. The elevator reached the basement and the doors opened. The hallway outside was dim, lit by a few buzzing fluorescent lights. The air felt colder down there, heavier somehow. That's when I saw him. A man, maybe in his late 60s, limping toward the elevator from down the hall. His movements were stiff and uneven, like every step hurt. His head was slightly tilted, his eyes unfocused. And then I saw his wrist. Red. My stomach dropped. I knew that man. He had died the night before. I remembered his face clearly because I'd been the one who performed his surgery. Complications. Internal bleeding. We tried everything, but he didn't make it. There was no mistaking him. Instinct took over before logic could catch up. I slammed my hand against the closed door button repeatedly. The elevator doors hesitated for a split second, then closed. The man was only a few feet away when they shut. The elevator began to rise. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stared at the closed doors, half expecting them to open again. They didn't. I let out a shaky breath and leaned back against the wall, trying to calm myself. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe the lighting played tricks on my eyes. But I knew what I'd seen. That's when the woman spoke. "Why did you do that?" Her voice was calm, but there was irritation in it. Like I'd cut in front of someone in line. He was trying to use the lift. I swallowed. My mouth felt dry. "Did you see his wrist?" I asked quietly. "It was red." She frowned slightly, confused. "He died last night," I continued. "I know because I did his surgery." The elevator continued upward in silence. The hum seemed louder now. My hands were shaking and I shoved them into my pockets to hide it. After a moment, she slowly turned toward me. "Oh," she said. Then she lifted her wrist. The band was fully visible now. "Red." She smiled. "Like this one?" My blood ran cold. I stared at her wrist, then at her face. Up close, something was wrong. Her skin looked too pale, almost waxy. Her eyes were dull, unfocused like glass. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the next floor. The doors opened. I didn't wait. I bolted out of the elevator, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. I didn't look back. I ran down the hallway until I reached the nurse's station, gasping for air. When I finally worked up the courage to look toward the elevators, the doors were already closed again. I checked the logs later that night. The woman had passed away 3 days earlier. Her room was still sealed. Her red band had never been removed. I transferred to day shifts shortly after that. But even now, years later, whenever I step into an elevator at a hospital, I always check risks first. I moved into that apartment building on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Nothing about the place stood out. It was one of those older buildings that had clearly seen better days. Faded paint, buzzing hallway lights, the faint smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with something stale. But it was cheap, close to work, and honestly, I just needed a fresh start. I dragged my boxes inside and went straight to the front desk to get my keys. The receptionist was an older woman, probably in her late 50s. She had tired eyes but a polite smile, the kind you give when you've been doing the same job for years. She slid the key across the counter toward me. "Third floor," she said. "Apartment 3B. I thanked her and picked up the key, but before I could turn away, she cleared her throat. "Oh, and one more thing." I looked back. "There's a door on your floor," she said carefully, choosing her words. "It doesn't have a number on it. Don't disturb it." That caught me off guard. "Don't disturb it?" I repeated. She nodded, still smiling, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just leave it alone." I thought about asking why, but I didn't. I just moved in, I was exhausted, and the last thing I wanted was to get involved in some weird building drama. I shrugged it off, thanked her again, and headed upstairs. The third floor hallway was narrow and dim. The carpet was worn thin, and every step echoed slightly. I found my apartment easily enough and spent the rest of the day unpacking. Clothes, dishes, books. Normal stuff. By the time night rolled around, I was tired but restless. That warning kept replaying in my head. A door with no number. Don't disturb it. At first, I told myself it was probably just a storage room or a maintenance closet. Maybe the receptionist just didn't want tenants snooping around. Still, the way she said it bothered me. Curiosity has always been my biggest flaw. Around 11 p.m., I stepped out into the hallway. It was quiet, too quiet. No voices, no TVs, just the faint hum of the lights above. I didn't have to look far. The door was only a few steps away from my apartment. No number, no label. Just a plain off-white door that looked older than the others. The paint was slightly cracked around the edges, and the doorknob looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I reached out and turned the knob. Lock. I hesitated, then slowly knelt down. I don't know what I expected to see through the keyhole. Darkness maybe. An empty room. Something boring. I leaned in and looked. The apartment inside was empty. Completely bare. No furniture. No decorations. Just a dull gray floor and blank walls. I scanned the room, my eye adjusting to the dim light, and then I saw her. A woman stood in the far corner, facing the wall. She wasn't moving. Her skin was unnaturally pale, almost white, and her long black hair hung straight down her back. I couldn't see her face, just her profile barely as she stood there inches from the wall like a child in timeout. A chill ran through me. I pulled back immediately, my heart pounding. The realization hit me all at once. What I was doing was wrong. I was spying on someone, invading their privacy. Maybe she lived there and just didn't want to be disturbed. Maybe she had her reasons. I stood up quickly and went back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. I barely slept that night. The next day I tried to forget about it. I went to work, ran errands, did everything I could to keep my mind busy. But no matter what I did, I kept seeing that image in my head. The woman, standing still, facing the wall. By evening, curiosity won again. I told myself I'd just take one more look, to make sure she was okay. To reassure myself that I hadn't imagined it. I stepped into the hallway and walked straight to the door. This time I didn't hesitate. I knelt down and looked through the keyhole. All I saw was red. Just red. Solid. Bright. Pressed right up against the keyhole. My stomach dropped. I pulled back, my heart racing. My first thought was that she'd caught me peeking the night before. That she'd blocked the keyhole on purpose. Covered it with something red to scare me. I felt embarrassed. Ashamed. I stood up and backed away from the door, deciding right then that I'd leave it alone for good. Instead, I went downstairs to the front desk. The receptionist looked up as I approached, and the moment our eyes met, she sighed. "You looked through the keyhole," she said. It wasn't a question. I froze, then nodded slowly. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. "I was hoping you wouldn't." I asked her what was behind the door. She was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "A couple lived there a long time ago," she said. "They kept to themselves. Never had visitors. Pale skin. Black hair." My chest tightened. One night, she continued, the husband snapped. He killed his wife inside that apartment. I swallowed hard. But, she added, lowering her voice, they weren't normal people. I asked her what she meant. She looked straight at me. They had red eyes. The air felt heavy around me. I thanked her and went back upstairs, my hands shaking. I didn't sleep much after that. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can see a faint red glow leaking out from under that door. And I never, ever looked through the keyhole again. This happened when I was really young, around 4 or 5 years old, but it's one of those memories that never faded. Even now, as an adult, I can still picture it clearly. Not like a dream, but like a moment frozen in time. My parents had just separated, and my mom and I were living alone in a small 2-bedroom apartment. It was on the first floor of an older complex, the kind with thin walls and long, dim hallways. The 2 bedrooms were at the very end of the hallway, directly across from each other. My room on one side, my mom's on the other. Even though I had my own room, I almost always slept in her bed when I stayed with her. I was young, scared of the dark, and everything in my life had just changed. Being close to her made me feel safe. It was summer. I remember that clearly because it was hot, and my mom always kept the window open at night. The window was right behind the bed, above the headboard. You could hear crickets outside, distant cars passing by, and sometimes people talking somewhere in the complex. That night felt no different from any other, until I woke up. I don't remember what woke me. There was no loud noise, no nightmare. I just remember suddenly being awake, sitting up in bed, my heart already beating a little faster for no clear reason. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of a street light coming through the window. The door to my mom's room was open like it usually was, and from where I sat I could see part of the hallway and the doorway to my own bedroom. That's when I noticed our cat. He was sitting in the doorway of my mom's room, perfectly still. That alone was strange. Our cat always slept in bed with us. Always. If he wasn't curled up by our feet, something was wrong. I remember staring at him, confused, watching his tail flick slowly from side to side. Then he stood up. He walked out into the hallway and into my bedroom. A second later, I heard him meow. It wasn't a normal meow. It was loud. Sure. Almost urgent. Something about it made my stomach tighten. I turned and shook my mom's arm, whispering her name. She stirred, groggy, asking what was wrong. It only took a few seconds for her to wake up fully, but in that small window of time, everything changed. As she lifted her head, we both looked toward the doorway, and there was a man standing there. He was in my bedroom doorway, partially lit by the faint hallway light, moving slowly, quietly, like he thought we were still asleep. He was turning his body sideways, easing himself out of my room. I don't remember what his face looked like. I don't remember clothes or details. What I remember is the shape of him. The way he didn't freeze when we saw him. The way he just kept moving. For half a second, no one made a sound. Then my mom reacted. I've never seen anyone move that fast before or since. She grabbed me, yanked me out of bed, and ran straight to the window. Before I could even understand what was happening, she lifted me up and threw me out through the screen. Literally threw me. We were on the first floor, so it was only a short drop, maybe 3 feet, but I hit the ground hard, knocking the air out of my lungs. I remember crying, more from shock than pain. A second later, my mom came out after me. We started screaming. Not just yelling, screaming. The kind of screaming that comes from pure fear. Lights started turning on in nearby apartments. Doors opened. Someone shouted that they were calling the police. The police arrived quickly, but by then, the man was gone. They searched the apartment from top to bottom. Closets, under beds, behind doors. They found no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no damaged locks. The only thing they noticed was that the front door was unlocked. That didn't make sense. My mom was adamant she always locked the door. Deadbolt. Chain. Every night, especially after the separation. She never forgot. The police suggested that maybe she'd accidentally left it unlocked. She knew she hadn't. They eventually left, saying there wasn't much else they could do. For the next week, my mom barely slept. Neither did I. Every sound felt louder. Every shadow felt wrong. We kept all the lights on at night. About a week later, my mom was cleaning the kitchen. She opened the small closet where the water heater was kept. And that's when she found it. A notebook. Inside were names. Pages of scribbles. Strange drawings. Nothing clearly threatening, but nothing normal either. There were also a pair of gloves stuffed into the corner, and gum wrappers. The police came back, but again there wasn't much they could do. No fingerprints. No clear evidence. Just speculation. Their theory was simple and terrifying. The man had likely been inside our apartment long before that night, hiding, waiting. He probably stayed hidden until he thought we were asleep, and only moved when the cat noticed him. That thought still makes my skin crawl. We moved not long after that. But even now, decades later, I still think about it sometimes. About how close he was. About how long he might have been watching us. And about how, if our cat hadn't meowed, I don't know what would have happened next. Before I tell this story, I want to be clear about something. This really happened. And even now, years later, it's still hard for me to talk about. I was 12 years old when it happened, but the events leading up to it started earlier than that. I moved in with my dad when I was 10. New town, new school, new everything. I didn't know anyone in the area except for one family, people my dad had known for years. It was a single mom and her 3 kids who lived a few streets over. They were basically the only familiar faces I had. One of her kids was a girl a couple of years older than me. When I first met her, she was about 12. We weren't best friends or anything, but we saw each other a lot. Same neighborhood. Same group of friends. The kind of situation where you don't talk every day, but you know each other well enough to feel comfortable. She was normal, quiet, a little shy. Nothing about her life seemed dangerous or unusual. That's what makes this so hard to accept. Her mom worked long hours and sometimes late nights. Because of that, the kids were used to being home alone. It wasn't seen as a big deal. This was a small town. Everyone knew everyone. Doors were usually locked, but nobody lived in fear. At least, not yet. One night, one of my friends, Rob, was hanging out at their house. He was there with her and her younger brother. Just the 3 of them. Their mom was at work and it was supposed to be a normal, boring night. TV on. Snacks. Killing time. What none of us knew at the time was that her mom had been helping a woman through her job. Just being kind. Offering support. Talking. Listening. Through those conversations, she learned that the woman had a sister who had recently been released from a mental institution. No one thought much of it. That sister had been asking questions. About where her siblings spent time. About who she talked to. About her family. About work schedules. And eventually, about the house. That night, there was a knock at the door. My friend assumed it was her mom. Her mom had a certain way of knocking, a pattern the kids recognized. And in the moment, without thinking, she opened the door. Rob realized immediately that something wasn't right. He wasn't supposed to be there and panic kicked in. He didn't wait to see what was happening. He climbed out through a window and ran back to his house down the road. He told me later that he still hears that door opening in his head sometimes. The woman who entered the house wasn't their mom. It was the sister. She knew exactly where she was. She knew the mom wasn't home. She knew there were children inside. What happened next is something I don't know all the details of, and honestly, I'm grateful for that. I know that my friend's younger brother managed to escape. He ran to a neighbor's house and called the police. That part saved his life. But my friend didn't make it out. She was killed that night. It was brutal. It was intentional. And it happened just days before Christmas. The house was treated like a crime scene for weeks. Police cars. Tape. Investigators going in and out. The entire neighborhood felt wrong, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. Word spread fast, even though adults tried to shield us from the details. We heard enough. The woman had hidden part of what she did. The police had to search the house carefully. Even the Christmas presents under the tree were examined. I remember hearing that and feeling sick. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. My parents said I was too young, that it would be too much. I didn't argue, but I still regret not being there. Feels like I never got to say goodbye. School felt different after that. Her desk was empty. Her name was still on attendance sheets for weeks. People whispered in the hallways. Teachers spoke softly. Parents walked their kids to the bus stop again. And Rob was never the same. He blamed himself for leaving, even though everyone told him he did the only thing he could. Even though he probably saved himself by running. Sometimes I think about how close I was to being there that night. How easily it could have been me instead. How random it all was. All it took was a knock on the door. Even now, I don't answer doors unless I know exactly who's on the other side. And every December, when Christmas lights go up and houses feel warm and safe, I remember that some monsters don't break in. Sometimes, they're invited inside. This happened after I got home from work one night, and at the time, it didn't feel scary at all. It felt normal. I was sitting in my room on the second floor, door mostly closed, just unwinding. Still in my work clothes, phone in my hand. The house was doing what it always did at night, quiet but not silent. My little brother was downstairs in the living room watching TV. I could hear it faintly through the floor. Some show with background noise and laughter every now and then. Nothing unusual. Our dog was asleep in the hallway right outside my bedroom door. She always slept there, curled up against the wall like she was guarding the room. She'd been there for years and I didn't think anything of it. Everything felt normal. Then out of nowhere the dog went insane. She jumped up so fast her nails clacked loudly against the hardwood. She started barking, spinning, howling, full-on chaos. Not playful barking, not excited barking. It sounded panicked. I pushed my chair back and stood up, already annoyed, thinking maybe my brother had come upstairs or she'd heard something outside. As I took a step toward the door, I heard a voice. Clear. Come. Mel. Ah, that's a good girl. It came from the hallway. It didn't sound threatening. It didn't sound angry. It sounded casual, familiar, like someone who belonged there. My first thought was our roommate, my dad's friend, who sometimes came home early from work. Without even thinking, I called out, "Oh, you're home early." I opened my bedroom door. The hallway was empty. No roommate, no footsteps, no movement, just the dog. She was standing near the end of the hallway, tail wagging hard, staring at nothing. Her ears were perked up, her body relaxed, happy even, like she'd just been praised by someone she trusted. My stomach dropped. I stepped fully into the hallway and looked both ways. Bathroom door closed. My brother's room empty. The stairs leading down were clear. Nothing. That's when my little brother came storming up the stairs. "What the hell did you do?" he yelled. "You got her all riled up." I told him I hadn't done anything, that she just freaked out on her own. He stopped halfway down the hallway and stared at me. "No," he said slowly. "I heard you." I frowned. "What?" "You said something to her," he said. "I heard a guy say, 'That's a good girl.' I thought it was you messing with me, or him." The air between us went heavy. I told him I heard it too. We both looked at the dog. She was still wagging her tail, staring at the same empty stretch of hallway. That's when fear really set in. We didn't yell. We didn't joke. We grabbed what we could. I took my butterfly knife. He grabbed his BB gun. Not because we thought it would actually help, but because holding something felt better than holding nothing. We searched the house. Every room. Every closet. Under beds. Behind shower curtains. Front door locked. Back door locked. Windows closed and latched. No one was there. No signs of forced entry. No open doors. No hiding places we missed. Eventually, the dog calmed down and laid back down in the hallway like nothing had happened. But neither of us slept much that night. We tried to rationalize it. Sound traveling through the house. The TV downstairs. Maybe we both imagined it. But the problem was, the voice came from inside the house. And it spoke directly to the dog. She reacted instantly, happily. Dogs don't wag their tails at nothing. After that night, things changed. The dog stopped sleeping in the hallway. She started sleeping inside my room instead, pressed up against the door like she was guarding it. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her sitting upright, staring at the crack beneath the door. Not barking, not growling, just watching. We never heard the voice again. Not clearly. But sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet and the TV downstairs was off, I'd hear faint movement in the hallway. Soft footsteps. The kind that stop when you start listening. And every time, the dog would lift her head, tail wagging. We moved out of that house eventually. New place. New neighborhood. No strange noises. No unexplained voices. But even now, I don't praise dogs out loud unless I can see them. Because whatever spoke to her that night didn't sound angry. It didn't sound dangerous. It sounded comfortable. Like it had been there before. And sometimes, when a dog I don't own suddenly wags its tail at empty air, I still wonder who it's listening to. This happened in the late 80s, or maybe the early 90s. I was around 6 or 7 years old, so some of the smaller details are fuzzy, but the feeling of that night has never left me. I was home with my older sister. She was about 14 or 15 at the time and babysat me pretty often. We lived in a small Texas town, the kind where everyone knows everyone and nothing ever seems to happen. Because of the age gap, we actually got along really well. I trusted her completely. That night, our parents were out and it was just the two of us. It was winter, around 8 in the evening. People don't usually associate Texas with cold, but the desert gets brutally cold after dark. Outside, it was completely black. We were sitting in the common room because that's where the TV was, stretched out on the floor with blankets. We were watching one of those hour-long crime news shows, 60 Minutes, 48 Hours, hard copy, something like that. The kind of show that probably wasn't meant for a kid my age, but back then no one really thought about that. This episode was especially disturbing. It was about a quiet man in a neighborhood who suddenly snapped, murdered his neighbors and kidnapped their young daughter. They were talking about how the suspect was still on the run. I remember feeling uneasy even before anything happened, like something about the timing was wrong. The layout of the room didn't help. One entire wall was made up of floor-to-ceiling windows, with a large glass door leading to the backyard. If the outside light wasn't on, and it wasn't, you couldn't see anything out there. Just darkness, like staring into a void. On the opposite side of the room was the front door. Solid wood. No window. Just a glass storm door on the outside. About 45 minutes into the show, right as they were talking about the manhunt, someone suddenly hit the front door hard. It wasn't a normal knock. It sounded aggressive, urgent. Both of us screamed and jumped to our feet. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. Then just as suddenly, everything went quiet. The only sounds left were the TV and our breathing. We stood there, frozen, staring at the front door. After a few seconds, my sister whispered that maybe something on the porch had blown into it. We had planters out there, a rocking chair. And in West Texas, strong winds were normal. For a moment, that explanation almost made sense. We waited. A minute passed. Maybe 2. The adrenaline started to fade just enough for logic to creep back in. Then we heard the storm door. It opened and then closed, slowly. There was no mistaking it. Someone had to physically open that door to be able to hit the front door like that. My stomach dropped. We were sitting on the floor again, too scared to stand. My sister crawled over to the TV and turned it off. It was an old set. You had to twist a metal dial. When it shut off, it made a dull, heavy sound that felt way too loud in the silence. Now the only light came from the kitchen down the hallway. Neither of us spoke. We just kept looking at the front door. I don't know how much time passed after that. It felt stretched, unreal. Eventually, I turned my head toward the back wall of windows. That's when we heard the back door handle move. I watched it happen. The knob turned slightly, rattling against the lock. It was locked, but only on the handle, no deadbolt. Whoever was there wasn't forcing it yet. They were testing it, carefully. Neither of us made a sound. I don't think either of us even breathed. Then the back door started moving violently. Someone was pulling on it, pushing against it, trying to get it open. The glass wall shook with each attempt, and I could see my reflection in the window blur and sharpen over and over as the door moved. It felt like the house itself was shaking. My sister finally broke. She screamed, not out of surprise but pure terror. She grabbed me and dragged me down the hallway to her bedroom. She slammed the door shut and shoved her mattress and anything else she could find in front of it. She had the phone. Thank God. It was one of those heavy beige cordless phones with the long metal antenna. She tried to call the sheriff, but in her panic she couldn't remember the number. Her hands were shaking so badly that she just pressed redial. It rang one of her friends. I remember her yelling into the phone, barely able to get the words out, telling them someone was trying to get into our house and that they needed to come immediately. The swearing shocked me more than anything. My sister never talked like that. I was curled up on the floor, shaking so hard I couldn't stop, convinced that someone was going to break through the door at any second. But nothing else happened. Eventually, headlights washed over the front of the house. My sister's friend had arrived, with her parents. They rushed inside and checked every room. The house was empty. No one was there. The sheriff came later. There were no signs of forced entry. Just a couple of scuff marks near the bottom of the back door. Marks we couldn't be sure hadn't already been there. No answers. No explanation. To this day, we don't know who was at our house or why. Maybe it was someone drunk. Maybe someone confused. Maybe someone dangerous who changed their mind. All I know is this. That crime show was still talking about the manhunt when it started. And whoever came to our house that night wasn't being quiet. They wanted inside. Nothing like that has ever happened to me again. But even now, decades later, I still check locks more than once. I still hate glass doors at night. And I still remember what it felt like to sit on the floor as a child, listening to someone try to get into our home, hoping the door would hold.
This happened just a few months ago. I live in a pretty big old house with 5 Navy guys. My room is in the detached garage, all by itself. Most of the time it's quiet out there. Comfortable. I've always liked the space, like the independence. Until that night. I was sleeping, or at least I thought I was, when I started hearing a rattling sound. First, I assumed it was part of a dream. My mind was hazy, and I wasn't fully awake. But the noise didn't stop. Kept going. The door was only a few feet from the end of my bed, and the knob was moving, rattling violently. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't casual. Someone was trying to open it. Someone was there. That's when I realized I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake. My dog, who never stirs in the night, was up and staring directly at the door. Tense, alert, ears pricked. I could feel her muscles trembling. Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong. I'd been locking my door more regularly lately, deadbolting it every night. I don't know why. Maybe something I read online had made me nervous. That habit probably saved me. That doesn't make it feel any less terrifying. Froze. I wanted to run. I wanted to yell. But I couldn't. My body refused to move. I didn't have anything to defend myself with except a metal flashlight, which I gripped so tightly my knuckles hurt. I curled up on the bed under the blanket, trying to disappear, trying to make myself small, hoping that somehow maybe it would be enough. The rattling continued. Every turn of the doorknob, every slight motion, made my heart leap into my throat. My mind raced. I imagined the worst scenarios. My roommates, 5 strong Navy guys, already hurt, or worse, and me trapped alone. I couldn't think of a single thing that would make it stop. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time seemed to stretch and collapse in impossible ways. I finally forced myself to move, but only just enough to crawl to the closet. It's a weird setup, with a high window and a bench underneath. I climbed onto the bench and peeked through the window. The motion light outside illuminated the yard briefly, then clicked off after a few seconds. Whoever, or whatever, was out there had left. I ran back to my bed and tried to calm down, to think rationally. Maybe someone was drunk, maybe it was a prank, maybe it was one of my roommate's friends coming home late. The clock said 2:30 a.m. Around the time bars close and people stumble home. That explanation felt comforting, but only just. I decided to text them to check without making a scene. "Hey guys, are you up? Do you have people over?" Someone was outside my door trying to get in. I assumed someone must be drunk or something. Kinda creepy. Less than 2 minutes later, I heard the back door of the main house swing open. Step, voices, whistling. My roommates were awake, running through the backyard, baseball bats in hand. One of them had woken another, and they were patrolling, checking every corner of the property. I ran inside with my dog, who stayed glued to me, trembling. I didn't sleep again that night. They spent hours making sure the house was secure, but they didn't see anyone. No one was hiding. No one had slipped away quietly. All they found was a pack of cigarettes and a bag of fast food in the backyard. Whoever had been there had clearly decided against going after the main house. With 6 cars in the driveway and the house full of people, maybe they thought the garage would be an easier target. Or maybe they were just reckless. Or maybe they were something worse. During those few minutes, I honestly believed I was going to be the last person in that house. Every creak, every shadow, every movement in the dark became amplified in my mind. I pictured the door breaking down, imagined hands reaching through the gap, imagined the worst. The fear was so intense it was physical. My chest ached, my knees shook, My flashlight felt like the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. After hours of patrolling, checking, and pacing, my roommates finally calmed down. I sat on the floor in the garage, staring at the door, not daring to move. My dog eventually lay down, but her ears remained perked, alert to every little sound. I felt frozen, like I'd been imprinted with the memory of that fear forever. Even now, months later, I can't sleep in that room without checking the deadbolt twice, sometimes 3 times. Keep the blinds closed. I don't leave the door unlocked for even a second. And every time I hear a noise outside, just a car driving past, a branch scraping the garage, I remember that night. I don't know who it was or what they wanted. I don't know why they left without trying harder, or why they chose that moment to appear. All I know is that for a brief, terrifying moment, I realized how vulnerable I really was. How quickly the world can feel like it's closing in. How completely alone you can feel, even in a house full of people. And that's what I carry with me. Not the cigarettes, not the bag of fast food, not the rattling doorknob itself, but the feeling of being completely exposed, completely helpless, and knowing that someone had been outside my door, just a few feet away, with no one to stop them if they had wanted to. I've slept in that room again, yes. But I never truly feel safe there. And I still remember what it was like to sit under that blanket, heart pounding, clutching a metal flashlight, praying that the door would hold, praying that I would survive the night.
I want to start by saying, this is true. It's something that still haunts me even years later. I've lived through moments that I can't fully explain, moments that broke me in ways no one could see. And it all started shortly after I graduated from high school. I woke up one morning like any other. I got out of bed and went into the living room, and that's when I saw him. My father. He was gone. Just lying there completely still. I remember my hands shaking as I tried to do CPR, as I pressed on his chest over and over, willing him to move, to breathe, to come back. But it was too late. The feeling that hit me in that moment, it's hard to describe. A mix of disbelief, horror, and emptiness that wrapped around me like a cold, suffocating blanket. I couldn't comprehend that he was gone. And after that, nothing in my life felt the same. For months, I suffered. PTSD isn't something you can see on the outside. It eats at you from the inside. Every night, I would have the same nightmare. I'd find myself walking toward the living room and I'd know exactly what I was about to see. I would scream before I even reached him. And then I would wake up, screaming. It lasted a year. I stopped functioning. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. Days would blur together and I would stay awake just to avoid the dream, avoid the inevitability of walking into that room again. One day I had a mental break in broad daylight. According to my girlfriend, my now wife, I tensed up like I was having a seizure for about an hour. I was living that morning over and over in my mind, a loop I couldn't escape. And then, finally, I let myself go into the living room. I allowed my body to confront the sight I had been running from. I saw him. And in that moment, something inside me broke, but in a way that finally allowed me to stop the nightmares. I didn't see him again in dreams. I didn't have to run from that memory anymore. Years later, I joined the army. In 2005, I was in Iraq leading a convoy. We had intel that terrorists were using children to ambush convoys. And I remember it like it was yesterday. We were moving along a road, the sun baking the sand and dirt into the air around us. I was focused, vigilant. And then a child ran out, maybe 300 meters in front of my truck. I froze. Everything inside me screamed. I had orders, rules drilled into us, to run over anyone in the road. But this wasn't just a target. This was a child. My truck chief was screaming at me to floor it. And I did. But at the last second, the kid dodged out of the way. We made it to the next FOB, but I couldn't shake what had just happened. I tried to sleep, tried to calm myself. But as soon as I closed my eyes, I was back on that road. The same scenario playing out again. And this time in the dream, I didn't avoid him. I hit him. The sound, the impact, the body. I can still feel it. And the horror of what I had done washed over me. But then, as I stumbled around the back of the truck, my mind, already fragile, reminded me of something, of my father. And just like that, I was transported back to my living room in high school. I was standing there, staring at his lifeless body, screaming with every fiber of my being, running, awake but somewhere else entirely, a part of me somewhere between Iraq and my old home, between reality and memory. When I woke up, I was in a part of the fob I didn't recognize. Heart pounding, drenched in sweat, shaking. For the first time, I realized how fragile my own mind could be. That experience, it changed me in a way nothing else could. I haven't had those nightmares since. Not the exact ones anyway. But the fear, it never really goes away. I live with the knowledge that my brain can take me to those places without warning. That my own memories, my own traumas, can trap me in a reality that feels just as real as the one I live in now. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about those moments. About the feeling of inevitability, of walking into that room, of being forced to make impossible choices in Iraq, of knowing that your own mind can betray you when you least expect it. And I still fear it. Not just the memory, but the idea that it could happen again. That the past in some way could find me. Because the truth is, once you've been there, once you've touched that edge, you never fully come back. I survived, but I'm still afraid of my own mind. I want to share something that happened a few years ago. Something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. My mother-in-law was an incredible woman. Funny, warm, the kind of person who could light up a room. She and my wife were extremely close. Sadly, she passed away when our son was just 4 months old. Losing her was devastating, but we tried to move forward, focusing on our little family. A few years later, we were living in an old 1930s craftsman house in Pasadena, California. It's one of those houses with creaky floors and character, the kind of place where you can almost feel its history pressing against the walls. Our son was about 3 at the time, full of energy and curiosity. One evening, I was giving him a bath. Everything seemed normal until he started looking over my shoulder. Not at random things, he was focused on something behind me. For a moment, I didn't think much of it until he asked me something that made me stop cold. "Why does Grandma call Mommy a funny name?" I froze. I asked him what he meant, thinking maybe he was talking about my mom. But he clarified in that calm, matter-of-fact way only a 3-year-old can manage. "Why does Grandma call Mommy his nickname for my wife?" I couldn't believe it. My wife and I had never used that nickname. It was only something her mom had called her since she was a baby. I asked him where he had heard it. "The farmer told me," he said. I blinked. "The farmer?" He nodded. "His friend." I told my wife about it later that evening. She was reduced to tears, not in sadness exactly, but in shock. There was no way our son could know that nickname, yet here he was repeating it. And he said it came from someone, or something he called the farmer. We tried to rationalize it. Kids say strange things sometimes, right? Maybe he overheard it somewhere. But there was no explanation. The following weekend, my wife was at work. I was home with our son, who was playing in his room. From the kitchen, I started hearing him talking, but not in the usual way. He was responding to someone. His voice said yes, no, I don't know that, and there was this soft, high-pitched giggle in between. I walked into his room and asked him what he was doing. "Playing," he said. I asked, "Playing with who?" "The farmer," he replied. My stomach sank. I was immediately reminded of movies like The Exorcist and that image of Captain Howdy. My heart was pounding. I asked him where the farmer was. "He left when you came in," he said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even want to be in the room with him. A few nights later, in the middle of the night, my wife and I were awake when we heard him speaking again. This time, his words cut right through the quiet of the house. "Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore," he said. We rushed to his room, both of us terrified, adrenaline pumping. He was sitting up in bed, completely calm. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied. "Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore." That was it. After that night, he never mentioned the farmer again. Never. Not once. To this day, he's 13 now, and he doesn't remember any of it. But we do. My wife and I still talk about it sometimes, quietly, in the dark, just to remind ourselves that it really happened. That whatever he was talking to, whatever the farmer was real in a way that we can't explain. Sometimes, when I hear him laughing in his room or playing quietly on his own, I catch myself wondering if he's talking to someone again. And I feel that same chill I felt the first time he mentioned that name. We moved on. Life went on. But that brief period, those nights, they left an impression. A reminder that the world is bigger than what we can see, and that children sometimes notice things adults can't even begin to understand. I don't know what the farmer was or why he was there, and maybe I don't want to. But I know this, whatever it was, it came with my mother-in-law's presence in some strange, inexplicable way. And for a short time, it was real enough that we couldn't ignore it. Even now, years later, I still get that chill when I hear my son talking to someone invisible in the corner of the room. And I still wonder if the farmer ever comes back. I want to tell you about something that happened a few weeks ago, something that's been on my mind ever since. My grandmother lives in an old house, really old, late 1700s. It's the kind of place with heavy wooden beams, creaky floors, and a history you can almost feel pressing down on you. On either side of the property there are graveyards. Old, overgrown, silent graveyards. You can smell the damp earth and the decay from the house, even when the wind isn't blowing. The other day a friend of mine, someone I hadn't seen in months, came to visit. We started walking down the cobblestone driveway leading up to the house, catching up, talking about life. At some point he started telling me about this spiritual awakening he'd experienced while at a drug treatment program. Not religious, he said, but more like he was tuned in to things he never noticed before. I believed him. He had gone through a lot and he seemed different somehow, more aware, like he was seeing the world differently. As we walked and talked, my cat came over. She's a quiet, reserved cat most of the time, but that day she started rubbing against my leg persistently. At first I thought she just wanted attention, but after a few minutes it felt different. She wasn't just seeking attention. She wanted me to follow her. I tried ignoring her at first. I stopped and she looked up at me, tail flicking, then rubbed herself against my leg again, insisting. Something in her eyes made me pause. Something almost urgent. So I started walking again, letting her guide me. My friend noticed but said nothing. I didn't have to explain. The cat led us down a narrow, overgrown path toward the graveyard. Every time I hesitated, she would meow softly and brush against me again, forcing me to keep moving. When we finally reached the graveyard, she stopped in front of a particular headstone. It was old, weathered, and narrow, the kind that leans slightly to one side after centuries of wind and rain. Without hesitation, she jumped up and perched herself right on top of it, balancing perfectly along the slender edge. I moved to pick her up, but she hissed, loud, "Sure." Something I've never heard from her before. My friend stepped closer, trying to lift her, and she hissed again, showing her teeth. We both froze. There was no way she was coming down. She was fixated, locked onto something. I finally noticed the inscription. The grave belonged to someone who had lived and died in this house. Long before we were here. Centuries ago, apparently. I felt a chill run through me, a weight pressing against my chest. We didn't know what to do. We just stood there, the wind moving the branches above us, making the shadows dance across the headstones. The cat stayed still balanced on that gravestone, her eyes locked on something invisible in the distance, her fur standing slightly on end. My friend, a little nervous but wanting to document it, took a photo. The flash illuminated her for a moment, perched on the headstone, and in that instant, I swear I saw her ears twitch toward something behind us. Something we couldn't see. After a few more tense minutes, she finally jumped down, brushing past me and heading back toward the house. I followed slowly, glancing back at the grave. I could still feel that presence, heavy in the air, as if someone, or something, had been watching us the entire time. When we got inside, I kept thinking about it. My grandmother's house, surrounded by centuries of graves. The cat, so ordinary, leading us to one specific grave, refusing to be moved. The way she hissed. Something told me that she had known something we didn't. Something that maybe still lingered around the house. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a spirit, or just some strange instinct my cat had. But the fact that she led us there, and only there, it's not something I'll ever forget. Even now, when I walk past that graveyard, or when I hear her meowing insistently at me, I can't shake the feeling that some part of the past is still here, quietly watching, waiting. And sometimes, when the wind moves through the trees just right, I swear I can hear a faint hiss like the one my cat made that day, as if someone, or something, is still standing on that gravestone just beyond what we can see. About 2 years ago, I went through the worst breakup of my life. Not the kind where people drift apart, but the kind where everything burns on the way down. There was a lot of crying, a lot of yelling, a lot of things said that you can't ever take back. Over time, it became clear that my ex had serious emotional issues, things I either ignored or didn't want to see while we were together. There was anger that came out of nowhere, lies that stacked on top of each other, and this constant need to control the situation. What made it even stranger was that she was the one who kept breaking things off, over and over. She'd dump me, come back, dump me again. And then one day I finally accepted it. I told her it was over for good and that it was time for her to leave my life. That's when things really changed. I started seeing someone new not long after, about 3 weeks later. It was healthy, calm, normal, and that absolutely enraged her. She couldn't stand that I'd moved on, especially after she'd spent so long pushing me away. One afternoon, she showed up at my apartment to pick up some belongings she'd left behind. I didn't want to see her, but I agreed, mostly because I just wanted it to be done. I wanted closure. I wanted peace. Instead, she asked me to sit down on the bed. She handed me a folded piece of paper and told me to read it out loud. I unfolded it and immediately felt my stomach drop. It wasn't a letter. It was a speech. Line after line tearing me apart, telling me I was incapable of love, that I was manipulative, that I was a terrible person, that I deserved to die. I told her I wasn't going to read it. She started screaming. Not crying, screaming. Her voice sharp, panicked, furious. She told me if I didn't read it, she wouldn't leave. She stood there shaking, staring at me like I was something she hated. So I did it. I read every word out loud, my voice cracking, my hands trembling, just hoping it would be over once I finished. When I finally reached the end, the room went quiet. Too quiet. She reached into her purse and pulled out a gun. I remember noticing small, stupid details. How heavy it looked in her hand. How calm her face suddenly became. How the room felt smaller, like the air itself had thickened. She told me it was loaded. Then she sat there, for what felt like forever, trying to convince herself to pull the trigger. She talked the entire time. She told me she knew the law, knew she'd be caught, knew exactly which prison she'd go to. She said she'd already accepted it, because at least I'd be gone. At least I wouldn't exist anymore. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just sat there with tears streaming down my face, trying not to completely fall apart. I told her she wasn't a killer, that this wasn't who she was, that she needed to leave and live her life without me. Every second felt like it could be the last one I'd ever experience. After about 15 minutes, 15 of the longest minutes of my life, something in her finally broke. Her hand started shaking. She lowered the gun. And then, she hugged me. Like nothing had happened. She left shortly after. I locked the door and sat on the floor for a long time, just staring at nothing, trying to convince myself I was still alive. That I hadn't imagined any of it. I never reported it. I didn't know how. I didn't know if anyone would believe me. And honestly, I just wanted it to be over. A couple months ago, I found out she got engaged. And that's the part that still messes with me. Because sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to not being here. How easily that moment could have gone the other way. And how someone capable of that kind of calm, deliberate hatred is now building a life with someone else. Someone who has no idea how close they might be standing to the edge. There's no jump scare ending to this story. No ghost. No monster. Just the quiet realization that the scariest thing I've ever faced wasn't supernatural at all. It was someone who loved me and decided for a moment that the world would be better without me in it. And that's something I don't think I'll ever fully stop being afraid of. When I was a kid, somewhere between 8 and 11, my sister, she's 7 years older than me, used to babysit me whenever our parents went out. She smoked a lot back then, and of course our parents made her go outside. Naturally, I would follow her into the carport just to be around, play around, annoy her. It was something we did almost every day. One afternoon, she notices something odd. At the end of our driveway, just sitting in the road, is a white SUV. I think it was a mid-90s Bravada, but I'm not really sure. What I do remember is that the windows were impossibly dark. You couldn't see inside at all. It just sat there, motionless for what felt like forever. At first, she ignored it. I mean, my sister's a brave lady. She wasn't easily rattled. But then, every time she went back inside and came back out to smoke, the SUV would move. Not randomly, but deliberately. It would drive to the end of the street, park in the church parking lot, and wait. Wait for her. And when she came back out, it would follow. The next day, it was back again. Same routine. sitting at the end of the driveway just watching. I don't know what the driver was doing inside, but it was like they were timing her every move. If I didn't go out, I'd watch from the window and the SUV would just sit there staring at her. Eventually, she told our dad. At the time, he was a sheriff's deputy. He called it in, filed a complaint, had the cops come around to check it out. But the SUV was gone by the time they got there. No footprints. No clues. Just gone. Months went by with nothing. And then, 9 months after the first sighting, it came back. This time, it became a regular occurrence. One afternoon, she had enough. She tells me to stay in the carport and watch while she confronts it. I watch her walk down the driveway and then, something changes. She stops. She later told us she felt absolute terror. Like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. Like her body knew that if she went any further, she wouldn't make it back. She turned around and went inside. It was chilling to watch. She didn't need to say it. I could feel it too. That SUV wasn't just following her. It was waiting. Watching. The scariest night was one when our family car was in the shop. Everyone was home, so we couldn't just avoid the driveway. My sister went outside again, I followed as usual, and eventually the SUV showed up. She told me to run inside and tell our dad. I did. Dad came out, gun in hand. He wasn't aiming it at the SUV. He was calm but brisk, moving down the driveway with purpose. The SUV floored it. It shot down the road and disappeared onto the highway. Dad, being a cop, took note of everything, the make, the model, distinguishing features. The license plate had been covered in duct tape. We never saw it again. Not after that night. Even now, I can remember the way the SUV just waited. Like it knew exactly where we were. The paranoia, the fear, the sense that someone, or something, was tracking us, it didn't go away for years. And I can still picture it sitting at the end of the driveway, all black glass, no face visible inside, just watching. It didn't matter that we were a normal family in a quiet neighborhood with a dad who was a sheriff's deputy. It didn't matter that my sister was brave. Something about that SUV was wrong. Something about it felt deliberate. My sister now shrugs it off like it was just some weird anomaly. But I still remember the feeling of absolute dread when it would appear. The way your stomach drops. The way your body freezes. And most of all, the way your mind can't stop imagining all the things someone could do when they're sitting in a vehicle like that watching a child. Even as an adult, I don't walk past the driveway at night without looking. I don't park on the street without checking the mirrors. And I think about that SUV. About the driver. About the fact that it was never just a random coincidence. Whatever it was patient. And it was deliberate. And the scariest part? You never know what's still out there waiting. When I was a kid, we moved into a house on Long Island in a town called Brentwood. At the time, it seemed like a quiet place, the kind of neighborhood where everyone waves at each other and nothing ever really happens. My dad worked as a taxi driver back then, which meant he'd often come home in the early morning hours, exhausted, stories spilling out about the weird things he'd seen or the people he'd picked up throughout the night. One Saturday morning, I was sitting on the living room floor watching cartoons. The house was quiet, still dark outside, and I heard the familiar rumble of my dad's car pulling up. I ran to the door to greet him, and just as I did, a voice called from the bedroom. "Hello, honey, don't go in the pool, it's not ready yet." I froze. It was my mother's voice. I looked at my dad. He froze too. At first, we thought maybe she'd come home early or maybe it was some kind of prank. But then we remembered, my mom was at work. We were the only two people in the house. Just the two of us. The voice had sounded exactly like her. Her tone, the little inflection at the end of "not ready yet," it was identical. And there was no one else in the house. We didn't talk about it much at the time because we didn't know what to say. But even as a kid, I felt that unease settle into my chest. Something was off. Fast forward a couple of weeks. We were still settling into the new house when our neighbors came over to welcome us to the area. 2 mothers, 2 sons, one about my age, one a little older, and 2 little girls. One of the girls was blonde and outgoing, the other a shy brunette. She barely said a word the entire time. We started playing soccer on the lawn. I noticed the little brunette wasn't with us, so naturally, curiosity got the better of me. I wandered off the grass, following the edge of the property, into the woods. It was a risky area. There were steep slopes and undergrowth that could easily trip a kid, but I kept going. That's when I found her. The little brunette girl just standing there watching me. She smiled and said, "Do you want to play tag?" I hesitated. Something didn't feel right. I wanted to get the other kids in on it, so I told her we should bring everyone else. Her reaction and the reactions of everyone else when I mentioned it were strange, confused, uneasy. "We only have one daughter," her mother said quietly, almost too softly. I froze. It didn't make sense. There were two girls. The blonde one I knew, and the brunette I just found. Her mother explained after a long pause that the little brunette had drowned in the pool 10 years ago, and the mother had passed away not long after from a heart attack. I don't even remember walking back to the house. I think I ran. My heart was hammering so fast I thought I might faint. I felt that same chill I'd felt the morning I heard my mother's voice. Something in that house was lingering, watching. The next few years were tense, terrifying even. The house felt alive in a way I didn't understand. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow cast by the trees outside, it wasn't just a house settling. It was something else. Something that was always there, just at the edge of sight. I remember small things. My toys would move when I wasn't looking, doors would open or close by themselves, and sometimes, just sometimes, I'd hear the voice again. That soft, familiar voice calling my name from empty rooms. My parents would brush it off, saying it was my imagination, that it was just the house settling. But I knew better. Even now, decades later, I can picture that pool, still and quiet. I can picture that little girl, brown hair slicked back from the water, standing silently at the edge of the woods. And I can hear that voice, the one I shouldn't have heard. The one that didn't belong in the house at all. We moved away eventually, but nothing about that house, or that voice, ever really left me. And every time I pass a pool, even now, there's this flicker of memory, this echo of something watching, waiting, lingering. Sometimes I wonder if the little brunette girl, or whatever she became, was trying to warn us. Or maybe she was just trapped in that space, reliving the same moment over and over. Either way, that house wasn't just a home. It was something else. Something that stayed with you long after you left. And to this day, I still remember her. I've experienced a lot of strange things in my life. Most of them are small, things that make your skin crawl but you can rationalize, things you laugh about later. But there's one experience that stuck with me and still haunts me to this day. It happened about 4 years ago at the end of my freshman year of college. I'd lived in the dorms all semester, had a great roommate, and overall, it had been a pretty normal experience. Or at least, normal until the last few weeks. Something in the hallways of our dorms changed. I can't really explain it. We were still our lively selves, joking, studying, hanging out, but just walking into the dorm, it felt wrong. There was this heavy sense of dread in the air. At first, we all wrote it off as stress from finals or too many all-nighters. But it lingered, this dark, subtle feeling that made the walls feel closer, the lights feel dimmer. One night, after a long session of studying, I decided to take a shower before trying to sleep. I should explain the layout first because it matters. Our hall was one of many on the floor. Each hall had 4 rooms for 2 students each and a single room for the RA. The entrance to the hall was a massive steel door with a small window. You could barely see through it. Across from the entrance was the bathroom. Honestly, it felt more like a prison block than a college dorm. The bathroom itself, it was a strange, reflective place. Walk in and you're met with 2 sets of sinks, 4 on each side facing mirrors. The mirrors created an endless reflection effect, like a tunnel stretching on forever. Past the sinks were the urinals on the left, the toilet stall, and 2 showers on the right. If the shower doors were open, you could see the reflection of the other side in the mirrors. The bathroom door was identical to the hall entrance, steel with a tiny window, and it was propped open with a wedge of wood that wouldn't move unless you really tried. So that night I was alone. I threw my clothes on the right sink, ready to reach around the shower stall to grab them. As I set everything down, I looked up into the mirror, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shimmer in the distance inside one of the stalls. My brain told me it was nothing, maybe just the exhaustion or the Red Bull and caffeine I'd had while studying. But it started moving. Slowly, from the farthest layer of the mirror, closer and closer. As it got nearer, I began to make out details. My chest tightened. I froze. It wasn't hair, but it looked like something dark, flowing, veil-like, partially transparent in places, but solid black from the torso down. And the face, I can't describe it. It was human enough to recognize, but so far removed that it didn't belong in this world. Eyes black, glowing somehow. I caught a glimpse for maybe a second. That second is burned into my mind forever. Then the lights went out. Pitch black. The door slammed behind me. I tried to open the bathroom door, but it wouldn't budge. Then an overwhelming smell of blood filled the air, and that's the last thing I remember. I woke up hours later in the hospital. My RA had been on his way to use the bathroom when he found me. I was in the shower stall, covered in blood from a massive nosebleed. According to him, I kept saying, "It saw me." My entire body was trembling. He called an ambulance. I don't even remember being moved. I was sedated because I was so hysterical. When I woke, my parents were there worried sick. The doctors suspected a seizure, but the CAT scans came back clean. No signs of epilepsy, no abnormalities. And I had taken Adderall countless times before. Never anything like this had happened. Nothing in my medical history explained it. It's been 4 years. I've been in therapy for 3 of them. I've talked to religious leaders, spiritual advisors, anyone I could think of, and no one could explain what I saw. They couldn't identify the pattern as anything known, nothing demonic or evil. Before that night, there had been no reports of activity in those dorms, and since then there hasn't been. Just that one incident. Even now, I can't stand to look into a mirror for more than a minute. If I'm in a room with one for too long, I start shaking. The memory doesn't fade. That feeling, that presence, it never leaves. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it. My rational mind fights me, but my body remembers the fear, the smell, the impossible glowing black eyes. And that's why, even years later, I still avoid mirrors whenever I can. Because I know, whatever it was, whatever I saw that night, it saw me too. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. As a teenager, I spent countless hours reading about ghosts, spirits, and haunted places. But I've learned that fascination can sometimes lead you into situations you really don't want to be in. About 10 years ago, when I was 19, I had a friend who was just as obsessed with the paranormal as I was. She was the kind of person who would buy every book, try every ritual, and explore every abandoned building in town. One day, she bought a board, a Ouija-style board called the Psychic Circle. It was strange. Unlike most boards, it had words, photos, symbols, and even came with a little guidebook explaining how to use it. For months, we never had any real success with it. Nothing moved. Nothing answered. It was mostly disappointing, but still fun in a creepy sort of way. Then one night, my friend took it over to her aunt's house. Her aunt had apparently used it before and had an intense experience with it. After that night, her aunt asked my friend to leave the board with her for a few days so she could try it on her own. My friend left it, and we made plans to come back that weekend to play together. Friday night came, and I remember getting in the car and feeling this sense of dread. It wasn't fear, not exactly, just this deep, sinking feeling in my chest that something was wrong. I'd had a few brushes with paranormal stuff before, and usually I welcomed it. But this was different. Something about that night, about that board, felt off. We got to her aunt's house, and the feeling intensified immediately. From the moment I stepped through the door, I felt unwelcome. Her aunt barely looked at me, and I could tell she didn't like me. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but it was hard to shake. The house itself didn't help. Dim lighting, heavy curtains, the faint smell of old wood and incense lingering in the air. Everything seemed sharper, closer, somehow oppressive. Then her aunt brought out the board. I'll never forget the way it looked. Weathered. The colors were faded, cracked, and it looked like it had been sitting in the sun for years. My friend's eyes went wide and she said, "What happened to it?" Her aunt didn't answer right away. She just stared at me for a long moment. And then she said almost quietly, "It's been sweating." I didn't understand at first. "Sweating?" I asked. "Yes," her aunt said. "It doesn't like you." I froze. My palms got clammy, my hands were shaking, and a knot formed in my stomach. I didn't want to touch it, but the curiosity, the years of fascination with the unknown, pushed me forward. I put my hands on the board just lightly, and her aunt's voice cut through me like ice. "No." I pulled my hands back immediately. "They don't want to answer your questions," she said. I can just tell. I wanted to argue. I wanted to laugh it off. But the look in her eyes, the way she spoke, it was clear she wasn't joking. I felt something in the room shift. It was like a heavy curtain had fallen over me, like the air itself had turned thick and dark. We left shortly after that. My friend was upset, confused. Her aunt had never acted like that before, and she refused to give the board back. I ended up buying one for myself eventually. I wanted to experiment to see for myself, but nothing happened with mine. No movement, no responses. It was as if it had been a warning, a sign I didn't fully understand at the time. I eventually gave it to other friends and never tried again. Even now, 10 years later, I can't shake that feeling. I can't explain the fear, the heaviness in the room, the way her aunt looked at me, like she could see something I couldn't. I still think about it sometimes at night. Sometimes I wonder if whatever was attached to that board knew me or maybe saw me. And I've learned something from that experience. Some things, some objects, some places, they're not meant for us. They're not meant to be understood, and they're certainly not meant to be controlled. Sometimes curiosity isn't brave. Sometimes it's dangerous. And sometimes it's better to just walk away. Because even when you think the experience is over, the memory, the dread, it never really leaves. I was sleeping around 3 a.m. in my basement room. It was just one of those nights where the house felt unusually quiet, heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it, a sound so jarring it made my stomach twist. Moaning. Someone was groaning in agony on the couch. At first I thought I was dreaming. Maybe it was one of those half-sleep hallucinations, the kind where your brain mixes reality with your dreams. I tried to convince myself it was nothing and turned over, pulling the blankets tighter. But it didn't stop. The sound was unmistakable. A low, guttural moan like someone was hurt, or worse. I cautiously leaned up, peeking around my bed. At first I saw just legs and shoes. I squinted, trying to recognize them. My brain flitted through the possibilities. Maybe it was a friend who had been over earlier. But something didn't fit. The legs didn't move the way his would. The shoes were wrong. My stomach dropped. I leaned up a little further and caught a glimpse of the face. He wasn't who I thought he was. His skin tone was different, his features unfamiliar. My heart started hammering. Panic. My first thought, attack. I had a small knife, maybe 3 inches, sitting on my nightstand. He hadn't noticed me yet. The whole situation felt like a nightmare, but it was happening in the real world. Then I remembered something about my basement room. The door locks from the outside. It was a converted basement, weird layout. I couldn't risk him leaving. I moved and he immediately heard me. His head snapped toward me, eyes wide. And then he lunged. I bolted out of the room and slammed the door behind me. The lock clicked into place and I leaned against it, shaking. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. But I couldn't stop. I had to get help. I sprinted up 2 flights of stairs, barely able to catch my breath, and woke my parents. At 15, I wasn't exactly sure how to explain it. I was terrified, hyperventilating, and my parents looked at me like I was having some sort of bad dream. But as they followed me down to the basement, the proof was undeniable. The edge of a 10-pound weight, the kind you'd never expect to come crashing from a room, broke through the door. It landed on the floor with a deafening crash. And there he was, standing in the middle of my room, fully awake, fully real, and clearly not in control of his senses. My mom reached for the phone immediately, calling 911, while my dad did what he always did. Weird family quirks aside, he grabbed a broadsword from a decorative suit of armor in the living room. Calm, controlled, and ready. He told me to fetch a cavalry saber from the umbrella stand, because apparently in this family, we were prepared for moments like this. By the time the police arrived, the guy was still in my room, clearly disoriented, glassy-eyed, and twitching. It turned out he was on PCP. He had somehow gotten in by diving through a window. I hadn't even felt the glass shatter. I take sleeping meds, so it didn't wake me. The officers quickly assessed the situation, confirming that he was indeed trespassing and dangerous. They told us that technically our containment of him, locking him in my room, was considered a citizen's arrest. Everything about that night felt surreal. I couldn't stop shaking. My hands were still trembling when the police led him away. Afterward, the house felt different. He was gone, yes, but the shadows seemed longer, the silence heavier. I kept replaying the moment I saw him standing there, the way his eyes darted toward me, and the sheer, unfiltered panic that coursed through me. Even now, years later, I can't think about that basement without a chill running down my spine. I've slept in that room again, but the shadows feel sharper, the corners darker. That night reminded me that sometimes the things that scare us aren't paranormal. They're real. They're human. And they can be far more terrifying than anything imagined. Because that night, I learned just how quickly safety can be shattered, how fast the familiar can become deadly, and how even in your own home, danger can appear out of nowhere. I was in Bolivia with the Peace Corps. I had just arrived only about 3 weeks into my service, and I was still getting used to everything. The culture, the people, the language. It all felt exciting at first. I met a group of guys who seemed friendly, fun to hang out with, and I started spending time with them. I thought I was making friends. A couple of days later, we were out at a potato farm. I was helping them plant a new section, just digging into the earth, minding my own business. It was hard, dusty work, but normal. Until I hit something. Something solid, buried just about 6 inches under the soil. I scraped it off with my shovel and it rolled up next to my feet. It was a human foot. I froze. My heart felt like it stopped. I didn't even know how to process it. The guys I was with didn't react like I expected. They didn't panic. They didn't call anyone. They just picked it up like it was nothing and shoved it back into the dirt, covering it up as if nothing had happened. I was terrified. My stomach dropped and a cold sweat ran down my back. I looked at them, trying to figure out if they were joking or if they meant to hurt me. I told them I needed to go back to my host family. I had to process what I'd just seen because I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. I was shaking, my mind racing, imagining every possible worst-case scenario. They laughed as I walked away, making it worse. I didn't know if they were trying to scare me or if I had just stumbled onto something much darker than I could understand. I kept expecting them to follow me, to try and harm me. My heart was pounding the entire walk back. When I got back to my host family, I told them what had happened. Their reaction didn't exactly calm me down. They said that area had a significant cartel presence, and it wasn't uncommon for people involved to bury body parts in the soil. I didn't sleep much that night. I called the Peace Corps and told them I needed to leave immediately. I explained everything. Within a few days, I was flown home. Even after returning, the fear didn't go away. It lingered in the corners of my mind, in every shadow. And then 1 week after I got home, a news report came out. Another Peace Corps volunteer, stationed in the same village I had been in, had disappeared. Never seen again. I can't help but think about it sometimes. I keep going over that moment in the potato field. The foot, the laughter, the soil covering it back up. I think about the people I was with. I think about how close I was. How easily it could have been me instead of that volunteer. And I shiver because it wasn't luck that saved me. It was something else. Something I can't explain. A few years later, I had another close call, though entirely different, but just as vivid. I was driving in the rain and my tires weren't great. I was going down this steep hill, feeling the car slide beneath me. Then, with a sickening crunch, I hit the guardrail, the only thing between me and an 80-foot drop. My car skidded, half of it dangling over the edge. I thought for sure I was going to die. And then, by some miracle, the underside of my car caught on an old tree trunk. My vehicle came to a stop, suspended just inches from the edge. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the wheel. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the rain pounding against the roof, the wind screaming past me, heart racing, alive but only just. Those two moments, so different yet so similar, have stayed with me for years. One, a brush with human evil buried in the soil. The other, a brush with death itself on the edge of a cliff. Both of them remind me how fragile life is, how quickly it can be taken away, and how little control we sometimes have over our own fate. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can feel that weight again, the terror of that field, the pitch-black abyss beneath my car. And I know even now that the world can be far darker, far stranger, and far more dangerous than most of us are willing to admit. Because sometimes, survival isn't about strength or skill, it's about being in the right place at the right time and maybe, just maybe, getting lucky. I remember it like it was yesterday, though it's been over a decade. It started at 10 p.m. I had just gotten ready for bed, feeling a little off, but I rarely got sick, so I didn't think much of it. Just a chill, really. I shrugged it off, told myself I was fine, and crawled into bed. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts louder than they should be. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But then, early the next morning, everything changed. I woke up and my heart felt like it was going to beat itself right out of my chest. My whole body, it was like I had been plunged into an ice bath. My limbs were frozen, my skin so cold it burned, and every breath I tried to take felt like I was sucking air through a straw. Panic set in. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. I woke my husband and told him I needed to go to the emergency room. He helped me up, steadying me as I tried to walk. I took 3 steps, and then I just collapsed. The next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance. The lights were flashing, the sirens wailing, and I felt suspended, like I was watching myself from outside my body. When we got to the ER, the doctors rushed me inside. I remember the numbers. My blood pressure was 33/25. I was in septic shock, my lungs riddled with double pneumonia, my kidneys failing. All of it less than 10 hours after a simple chill. They moved quickly. I remember one of the doctors sewing a line into my neck to get fluids and medicine into me, every touch and motion urgent, precise, terrifying. Then they wheeled me into the intensive care unit and told my husband what I already knew in some part of my mind. I was hours from death. 6 to 8 hours, they said. 7 out of 10 people in my condition didn't survive. The next 5 days were a blur. Sedated, weak, terrified. The worst part was the silence between the moments of panic. My family had no hope. The machines around me beeping, humming, a cold mechanical heartbeat trying to keep me alive. I was on a ventilator for 8 days. 8 long, terrifying days where I was not sure if I would ever open my eyes again. When I finally began to stabilize, they told my husband, they told him I'd probably never breathe normally again. I'd be on oxygen, debilitated, and invalid, and that I would die within 5 years from the damage to my lungs. That was 12 years ago. Today I'm not on oxygen. I'm not an invalid. I've rebuilt a life that should have been taken from me that night. I work, I laugh, I love, but I carry it with me. The shadow of that night never really leaves. I still get hospitalized about 3 times a year for pneumonia. I get tired faster than I used to. I notice every small ache, every cough, every chill. It's a permanent reminder that life is fragile. And the scariest part? That night didn't feel like death. It felt like a choice. One moment I was living normally. The next, everything I had taken for granted was gone. The line between here and gone, it's thinner than you think. You don't realize it until you've been to that edge. I still think about it every time I close my eyes, every time I hear someone cough or see a hospital bed. Life can turn on a dime. That chill at 10 p.m., it almost killed me, and I'll never forget it. I've had a few experiences in my life that I can't quite explain, but one of them, that one still sticks with me. It was about 4 years ago. My wife and I were in bed, our room at the far end of the hallway from our 2 boys' bedroom. At the time, she was pregnant and our sons were about 3 and 6. We had a baby monitor in their room, the receiver in ours. It was just a normal night. I woke up in the middle of the night, something felt off. And then I heard it, a voice coming through the baby monitor. My 6-year-old was talking. At first, I thought he was talking in his sleep to his younger brother. But as I listened, it didn't feel like that. There was a cadence, a back and forth rhythm like he was having a conversation with someone. And there was no other voice. My heart started pounding. I don't know why, but the first thought in my head was that there was someone in the room. I could feel my body tense, every instinct screaming at me. My wife was asleep just a few rooms away, pregnant, and then there were the boys alone. I quietly got out of bed, every sense on high alert, and started walking toward their room. The closer I got, the more I could hear him talking, still just his voice. And with every step I took, my mind ran through every scenario. A burglar? An intruder? Someone with bad intentions? I passed the bathroom and grabbed a pair of scissors, holding them tightly, ready to defend my family. My pulse was racing so fast I could feel it in my throat. I reached their door. It was slightly closed. I popped it open, swung the light on, and froze. The 3-year-old was asleep. The 6-year-old, sitting up in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I checked under the beds, the closet, everything. Nothing. The room was completely empty except for my boys. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking. I asked my son who he had been talking to. He looked at me calm as could be and said, "Nobody," and laid back down, closed his eyes. I stood there for a long time, the adrenaline still coursing through me like electricity. I double-checked the rest of the house. Doors, windows, everything secure. I couldn't sleep after that. My mind kept replaying it over and over, imagining all the things that could have happened. Every shadow in that hallway felt alive. Every creak of the floorboards felt threatening. The weirdest part? My son never talked in his sleep again. Neither did my younger one. And it wasn't just that night. It's like the incident scared it out of him, or maybe scared whatever was away. It's an anticlimactic story in a way. There was no monster hiding in the closet, no malevolent figure. But that doesn't make it any less terrifying. For a few minutes that night, I truly believed someone had entered my house. That someone had been watching my children while I slept. That fear, that absolute bone-deep fear, is something I'll never forget. Even now, when I hear a creak in the middle of the night, I can't help but remember that night. How quickly reality can twist into something unrecognizable. How easily our minds convince us that danger is right around the corner, even when, in the end, it's just the ordinary that felt terrifying in that moment. It's funny in hindsight. And yet, even after all these years, I can still feel it. That primal panic, the way my muscles tensed, the scissors in my hand shaking, the overwhelming need to protect my family. It was real. I felt it. And that's enough to stay with you forever.